Kevin took a deep breath as he boarded the plane, pulling his carry-on behind him. The hustle of the airport faded as he stepped into the narrow aisle of the aircraft. He looked around, searching for his seat, but couldn't help but notice the cold stares from the flight attendants. One in particular, Sarah, shot him a glance that felt more like a warning than a welcome. Kevin wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but he had seen that look before. Dismissive, judgmental. He adjusted his grip on his bag and made his way to his seat in silence, already feeling the tension building in the air. "Excuse me," Kevin said politely as he tried to store his bag in the overhead compartment, but Sarah just walked past him, ignoring his request for assistance. He shrugged it off, though the sting of her attitude lingered. He wasn't here to cause trouble, just to enjoy a peaceful flight. Little did he know, this journey would be anything but routine. As Kevin settled into his seat, the plane began to taxi toward the runway. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, and passengers prepared for takeoff. Kevin stared out the window, trying to focus on the view instead of the growing discomfort inside him. But something didn't feel right. The plane suddenly shook, jerking to one side. Gasps filled the cabin as passengers clutched their armrests. Kevin's instincts kicked in immediately, his pilot training coming to the surface. He glanced around, noticing the look of panic spreading among the crew. And then, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please stay seated." The announcement cut off abruptly, leaving the cabin in uneasy silence. Kevin's pulse quickened. Something was definitely wrong. Kevin's heart raced as he tried to calm himself. He had been on turbulent flights before, but this felt different. The captain's sudden silence only added to the tension, and the unease in the cabin was palpable. Sarah walked down the aisle with a forced smile, trying to reassure the passengers, but her stiff posture betrayed her anxiety. As she passed Kevin again, he noticed her quick glance toward him. There it was, the same dismissive look she had given earlier. It was as if, in her eyes, Kevin was just another passenger she had to tolerate. He had done nothing to deserve her coldness, but the way she walked past him without a word or a glance of acknowledgement said enough. Kevin shifted in his seat, trying to stay calm, but the weight of Sarah's attitude pressed on him. He wasn't the type to make a scene or demand respect, but he wasn't blind to the fact that Sarah was treating him differently. He had seen it before, people assuming things about him just because of the color of his skin. Normally, he let it slide, but today, in the middle of a turbulent flight, it stung a little more. "Is everything alright?" Kevin finally asked, leaning slightly toward Sarah as she passed by again. Sarah glanced at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's just turbulence," she said shortly. "Please remain seated." Her tone was sharp, almost dismissive, and she quickly moved on, offering a polite smile to the passengers in the row ahead. Kevin clenched his jaw, choosing to stay silent. There was no point in pushing the issue. He wasn't here to make friends or argue with flight attendants. He was here to get to his destination. But the turbulence persisted, growing stronger with each minute. The plane lurched again, causing drinks to spill and passengers to murmur nervously. Kevin's grip tightened on the armrest as he watched the flight attendants scramble to keep everything under control. He knew something wasn't right. His years as a pilot had taught him to recognize the difference between normal turbulence and something more serious. The plane was struggling, and Kevin could feel it. He could see the fear in the eyes of the other passengers, but none of them knew what he did, that this situation could easily escalate. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time more strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain calm and seated as we attempt to resolve the issue." The announcement cut off once more, leaving the cabin in silence. This time, the unease turned into full-blown panic. Passengers whispered to each other, their eyes darting nervously toward the windows and the flight crew. Kevin sat back in his seat, his mind racing. Should he say something? Should he offer to help? He was a pilot. After all, he knew how to handle these kinds of situations. But the memory of Sarah's cold stare and sharp tone held him back. Would they even listen to him? Would they even take him seriously? He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. Something had to be done, and fast. The plane hit another violent jolt, and this time, the oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Gasps filled the cabin as passengers hurriedly grabbed the masks, fumbling to get them on. Kevin reached for his own, but his mind was already working ahead. He knew what this meant. Something serious was happening, and the situation was spiraling out of control. The flight attendants, including Sarah, rushed down the aisles, trying to calm the passengers and help them with their masks. Kevin watched Sarah closely as she worked, her face tight with stress. She wasn't just ignoring him anymore, now she was barely holding it together herself. Kevin couldn't stay silent any longer. He stood up, despite the plane's shaking, and made his way toward the front of the cabin. Sarah spotted him immediately. "Sir, you need to sit down," she snapped, her voice high with panic. "I'm a pilot," Kevin said, his voice calm but firm. "I can help." Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned by his words. "What?" "I'm a pilot," Kevin repeated. "I know what's happening. Let me help." For a moment, Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting from Kevin to the cockpit door. She was still skeptical, but the urgency of the situation seemed to outweigh her doubt. Finally, with a reluctant nod, she stepped aside. Kevin didn't waste any time. He made his way to the cockpit, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached the door, he could hear the co-pilot shouting, desperately trying to keep the plane under control. He knocked on the door and called out, "I'm a pilot. Let me in. I can help." There was a moment of silence, and then the door cracked open. The co-pilot, sweating and visibly shaken, glanced at Kevin, his eyes wide with fear. "I can't do this alone," the co-pilot said, his voice trembling. "The captain is out cold, and the controls are." "I've got it," Kevin said, stepping into the cockpit. "I'll take it from here." The co-pilot moved aside as Kevin took the captain's seat, his hands instinctively reaching for the controls. The plane was in bad shape, but Kevin had been in tough situations before. He quickly assessed the situation, his mind running through all the possible scenarios. "All right," Kevin muttered to himself. "Let's bring this bird home." With steady hands, Kevin began to take control, his years of experience guiding him through the chaos. Outside, the turbulence still raged, but inside the cockpit, Kevin's calm presence brought a sense of order. But even as he worked to stabilize the plane, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Kevin gripped the controls tightly, his fingers moving expertly across the dashboard. The plane bucked and shuddered beneath him, but he remained calm, his years of training kicking in. The co-pilot beside him was still rattled, but Kevin needed him focused. "Stay with me," Kevin said firmly, glancing over at the co-pilot. "We can do this, but I need your help." The co-pilot nodded quickly, though his hands trembled as he tried to keep up with Kevin's instructions. The plane was losing altitude fast, and the ground was getting closer by the second. Kevin's mind raced, calculating the best way to bring the plane back under control before it was too late. The intercom crackled as Sarah's voice came through, shaky but still trying to keep it together. "Passengers, please remain calm. We are working on the situation. Please keep your seatbelts fastened and masks on." Kevin barely had time to think about what was happening in the cabin. His entire focus was on the controls, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. There were over 100 people on this flight, all of them depending on him. And for a brief moment, Kevin felt the sting of doubt. Could he really do this? Could he save them all? He shook the thought away. Now wasn't the time for doubt. He had to act. "We've got engine failure," Kevin muttered, his eyes scanning the instrument panel. "We're going to have to make an emergency landing. Radio the nearest tower. Tell them to clear a runway." The co-pilot fumbled with the radio, his voice shaking as he made the call. Meanwhile, Kevin began adjusting the plane's angle, trying to level it out. It wasn't easy. The turbulence was relentless, and the plane was still fighting against him. But Kevin had been through worse. He knew how to handle an emergency, and he wasn't about to give up. The ground loomed closer, and the plane continued to descend. Kevin's heart pounded, but his hands were steady as he maneuvered the aircraft into a controlled glide. They were losing altitude too fast for comfort, but Kevin refused to panic. "I've got this," he muttered again, more to himself than to the co-pilot. "We're going to make it." In the cabin, the tension was unbearable. Passengers clutched their seats and prayed silently as the plane dipped lower and lower. The oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling, and the cabin lights flickered ominously. Every now and then, the plane shuddered violently, eliciting gasps and cries of fear from the passengers. Sarah paced up and down the aisle, her face pale and her hands shaking. She had never been in a situation like this before, and the fear gnawed at her insides. But even amid the chaos, one thought kept circling in her mind: Kevin. She still couldn't believe that the man she had dismissed so easily, the man she had judged without knowing, was now the one in control of their fate. Guilt gnawed at her as she remembered how she had treated him earlier, and now, here he was, risking his own life to save them all. A violent jolt rocked the plane, sending Sarah stumbling into a seat. She caught herself and quickly stood back up, forcing herself to focus. There would be time for regret later, if they made it through this alive. Kevin's voice came over the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to make an emergency landing. Please remain seated and brace for impact." A collective gasp went through the cabin. Passengers clung to each other, fear etched on their faces. Sarah moved quickly, helping those who were struggling to secure their seatbelts, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. In the cockpit, Kevin's focus was razor sharp. The runway was in sight now, but the plane was still descending too quickly. He had to make the landing as smooth as possible, or they would crash. "Lower the landing gear," Kevin instructed, his voice calm but tense. The co-pilot did as he was told, his hands shaking as he worked the controls. Kevin's heart pounded in his chest as he adjusted the plane's angle, trying to slow their descent. "Come on," Kevin muttered under his breath. "Just a little more." The ground rushed up to meet them, and for a split second, Kevin wasn't sure if they were going to make it. But then, with a jolt and a deafening roar, the wheels hit the runway. The impact was hard, and the plane bounced once before skidding along the tarmac. Kevin fought to keep the plane steady, his hands gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. The screech of metal against the runway filled the cabin, and passengers screamed as the plane careened forward. But then, slowly, the plane began to slow down. The worst was over, but they weren't out of danger yet. As the plane finally came to a stop on the runway, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. For a moment, no one moved. The passengers sat frozen in their seats, still clutching their seat belts and masks, too shocked to react. In the cockpit, Kevin let out a long, shaky breath. His hands were still trembling from the adrenaline, but he had done it. He had saved them all. The co-pilot stared at him in awe, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Well done," Kevin said quietly, patting the co-pilot on the shoulder before standing up. He didn't wait for thanks or applause. Without a word, Kevin made his way out of the cockpit and into the cabin. As he walked down the aisle, he could feel the eyes of every passenger on him, their faces filled with disbelief and gratitude. Sarah was standing near the front, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. She stared at Kevin as he approached, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to say something, but no words came out. Kevin gave her a small, knowing nod before continuing down the aisle. He didn't need recognition or praise. He had done what needed to be done, and that was enough. But even as he walked away, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The flight may have ended, but the journey had only just begun. The plane sat still on the runway, the sound of emergency vehicles in the distance breaking the eerie silence inside. Kevin kept walking, his mind already processing everything that had just happened. He had done what needed to be done, but the weight of the situation still hung over him like a storm cloud. Passengers were starting to stir now, unbuckling their seatbelts and murmuring amongst themselves. Some were crying, others just staring blankly ahead, still in shock. The magnitude of what they had just survived was sinking in. Slowly, people began to rise from their seats, eager to get off the plane and back to solid ground. Sarah was still standing frozen by the front of the cabin, her eyes locked on Kevin. Her hands trembled as she tried to process the man she had dismissed so easily. He wasn't just a passenger. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was the reason they were alive. The guilt washed over her in waves, leaving her feeling small and ashamed. Kevin's calm, confident demeanor as he walked away made her feel even worse. He didn't gloat, didn't look for recognition or thanks. He had saved them all, and yet he acted as though it was just another day. Before she knew it, Sarah found herself moving after him. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she couldn't let him leave without acknowledging what had happened, without apologizing. "Kevin," she called out, her voice shaky. Kevin stopped in his tracks but didn't turn around immediately. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. Sarah approached him cautiously, her face pale and her voice small. I didn't know you were a pilot," she stammered, her eyes downcast. I'm sorry for how I treated you." Kevin looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He could see the regret in her eyes, but he wasn't sure what to say. He had faced discrimination before, but something about this moment felt different. "You didn't need to know I was a pilot," Kevin said finally, his voice calm. "You just needed to treat me like any other person." Sarah winced at his words, knowing they were true. She had made assumptions about Kevin based on nothing more than appearances, and it had almost cost her everything. "I'm really sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have treated you like that." Kevin gave a small nod, accepting her apology, but he wasn't looking for redemption from her. There was more at stake here than just Sarah's attitude. He had faced this kind of prejudice all his life, and one apology wouldn't change the world, but it was a start. "You're alive," Kevin said simply. "That's what matters." Before Sarah could respond, the emergency crew began to board the plane, ushering the passengers out in an orderly fashion. The chaos of the situation took over once again, and Kevin turned away, leaving Sarah standing there with her guilt. The news spread quickly. By the time the passengers had been safely escorted off the plane, reporters were already gathering at the airport. The story was all over the local news. "Black pilot saves doomed flight." The headline caught fire on social media, and soon, Kevin's name was everywhere. But Kevin wasn't interested in fame. He kept to himself, avoiding the cameras and the questions as much as possible. As the passengers were led to safety, many of them approached him, offering heartfelt thanks and praise, but Kevin remained humble. He had done his job, nothing more. Still, the spotlight was unavoidable. The media was clamoring for interviews, eager to tell the story of the man who had saved an entire flight, but Kevin wasn't ready to talk. The weight of what had happened was still fresh in his mind, and he didn't want the focus to be on him. There were deeper issues at play here, issues that went beyond one heroic act. As Kevin waited for the formal debrief with the airline, he found a quiet corner in the terminal and sat down, trying to process everything. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving him exhausted. He hadn't had time to think about his own emotions during the ordeal, but now, sitting in the quiet aftermath, it all hit him at once. The prejudice he had faced on the flight wasn't new, but this time, it had almost cost lives. And the fact that he had to prove himself, had to be the one to save everyone just to gain basic respect, it gnawed at him. Why couldn't he just be seen for who he was? Why did it always take an extraordinary act for people to realize their assumptions were wrong? As he sat there, deep in thought, a figure approached him. It was the co-pilot, his face still pale but filled with gratitude. "Kevin," the co-pilot said softly, sitting down next to him. "I just wanted to thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Kevin nodded, his eyes distant. "You did your best," he said quietly, "but we were all in trouble." The co-pilot was silent for a moment, then he spoke again. "I heard about how the flight attendants treated you. I'm sorry you had to deal with that on top of everything else." Kevin didn't respond immediately. He wasn't looking for pity, and he didn't want to rehash the details. But the co-pilot's words stuck with him. This wasn't just about one flight or one person. It was a reflection of something much bigger. "It's not just this flight," Kevin finally said, his voice soft but firm. "It's the way things are. People see what they want to see, not who you really are." The co-pilot nodded slowly, his face filled with understanding. "Well, after today, I think a lot of people are going to see you for who you really are." Kevin wasn't so sure. He had made a difference today, but changing people's minds took more than one act of heroism. Still, he had done what he needed to do, and for now, that was enough. But as he stood up and made his way toward the exit, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The journey was far from over. The real battle wasn't just in the sky, it was in the hearts and minds of the people around him. Kevin walked out of the airport, trying to avoid the growing crowd of reporters waiting just beyond the doors. Flashing cameras, microphones, and journalists calling his name surrounded him as he made his way through the chaotic scene. Every news outlet wanted the story. They wanted to know who Kevin was, why he had been on that flight, and how he had managed to save them all. But Kevin wasn't interested in giving interviews. He wasn't seeking attention, and the idea of his name being thrown around in headlines didn't sit well with him. This wasn't about being a hero to him. This was about doing what was right in a moment of crisis. He pushed through the crowd, keeping his head down, but the reporters didn't give up easily. One of them, a young woman with a camera crew, managed to get close enough to ask, Kevin, how did you stay so calm when the plane was going down? What was going through your mind? Kevin paused for a moment, glancing back at the woman. Her eyes were wide with curiosity, and she held the microphone out to him, waiting for an answer. He could feel the pressure building around him as everyone seemed to wait for his response. I just did what any trained pilot would do in that situation, Kevin said simply. My focus was on getting everyone to safety. The reporter wasn't satisfied with such a brief answer. But weren't you just a passenger on that flight? How did you know how to handle the controls? I'm a pilot, Kevin replied, his voice calm. I've been flying for years. The reporter's eyes lit up at his admission. So, you were more than just a passenger. Can you tell us about your experience as a black pilot? Do you think you were treated differently on that flight because of your race? Kevin stiffened at the question. He didn't want to make this about race, even though he knew that was a big part of the story. But the way the crew had treated him, the dismissive looks, the snide comments, it wasn't something he could ignore either. I think people make assumptions, Kevin said carefully. Sometimes those assumptions are based on what they see on the outside, not who a person really is. But when it comes down to it, skill and experience are what matter, not how you look. Before the reporter could ask another question, Kevin nodded politely and continued walking, leaving the crowd of journalists behind. He had said enough, and he didn't want to get caught up in the media frenzy. There were bigger issues at play, and he wasn't sure how the world would handle the story of a black pilot saving the day. As the story of the flight spread, so did the reactions. Social media exploded with praise for Kevin, but not everyone was celebrating his heroism. Some people questioned whether Kevin should have been allowed to take control of the plane in the first place. There were online discussions about whether he had overstepped his role as a passenger, and even some ugly comments about race surfaced in the conversations. Kevin tried to avoid the negativity, but it was hard to escape it. Everywhere he turned, people were talking about him, both in praise and in criticism. It was exhausting, and Kevin found himself feeling more isolated than ever, even in the midst of all the attention. His phone rang constantly, with friends, family, and even colleagues from the aviation industry reaching out to congratulate him. But amid the support, there were voices of doubt. Some people he had worked with in the past called him reckless for stepping in, even though he had saved everyone on board. One evening, Kevin sat in his apartment, scrolling through the endless stream of comments online. Some were supportive, but others stung. He saw comments like, why didn't the flight crew handle it? Wasn't there another pilot on board? And would they have let him take control if they knew he was black from the start? Kevin sighed, putting his phone down. He had done what needed to be done, and yet, people were still questioning him. It was a reminder that no matter what he achieved, there would always be those who doubted his abilities, who saw him as less capable because of the color of his skin. But Kevin knew he couldn't let that stop him. He had survived tougher challenges before, and he wasn't going to let the negativity overshadow the fact that lives had been saved that day. The next morning, Kevin received an unexpected call. It was from a prominent civil rights organization that had heard about his story. They wanted him to speak at an event focused on racial discrimination in the aviation industry. They saw him as a symbol of resilience and a voice for change. Kevin hesitated. He had never been one for public speaking, and the idea of standing in front of an audience to talk about his experience was daunting. But as he listened to the representative on the phone, he realized that this was bigger than just his story. This was about bringing attention to the challenges that black pilots faced every day, challenges that he knew all too well. You don't have to do it alone, the representative said, but your story could inspire others. It could make a difference. Kevin agreed to think about it. He hung up the phone and stared out the window of his apartment, lost in thought. Could his story really make a difference? Could sharing his experience change the way people saw black pilots, or even help dismantle some of the systemic racism that plagued the aviation industry? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't stay silent. He had the opportunity to spark a conversation that was long overdue, and maybe, just maybe, his story could be a catalyst for change. But he also knew that speaking out would come with its own set of challenges. There would be backlash, and not everyone would be ready to listen. But Kevin had faced adversity before, and he was ready to face it again if it meant making a difference. A few days later, Kevin received another call, this time from the airline that had been responsible for the flight. They wanted to formally thank him for his actions and offer him recognition for saving the passengers and crew. But Kevin wasn't sure how to feel about the invitation. While he appreciated the gesture, he couldn't forget how he had been treated by the flight staff before they knew who he was. The dismissive looks, the disrespect, all because they had assumed he was just another black passenger who didn't belong in their world. The airline representative on the phone was polite and professional, but Kevin could sense that they were trying to control the narrative. They wanted to turn this into a feel-good story, a tale of heroism without acknowledging the deeper issues that had led to the crisis in the first place. Kevin agreed to meet with them, but he knew that this meeting would be more than just a celebration. It would be a moment of reckoning, an opportunity to confront the unspoken prejudices that had played a role in the events leading up to the emergency. As he prepared for the meeting, Kevin couldn't help but wonder how it would all play out. Would the airline truly acknowledge their mistakes, or would they sweep it under the rug in favor of a neatly packaged story for the media? The day of the meeting arrived, and Kevin walked into the airline's headquarters with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The sleek, modern building stood tall against the skyline, a stark contrast to the emotions swirling inside him. He was determined to make his voice heard, but he also felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. As he entered the conference room, he was greeted by a panel of executives, including the CEO of the airline and several high-ranking officials. They smiled warmly, but Kevin could sense the tension in the air. They had invited him in not just to thank him but to shape the narrative surrounding his actions. "Thank you for joining us today, Kevin," the CEO said, extending a hand. "We're grateful for your bravery during the flight, and we want to formally recognize your actions." Kevin shook the CEO's hand, keeping his expression neutral. "I appreciate the recognition, but I have some concerns I'd like to discuss." The executives exchanged glances, a flicker of surprise passing between them. They had anticipated a straightforward meeting, a chance to celebrate a hero. But Kevin had a different agenda. "I want to talk about the way I was treated on that flight," Kevin continued. "The cold stares, the dismissive attitudes. It made me feel unwelcome and unworthy of being there, even though I am a trained pilot." The CEO cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "We are aware that the situation was challenging, and we are investigating the matter. However, we also want to focus on the positive outcome. Your actions saved lives, and that's what we want to highlight." Kevin leaned forward, his voice firm. "I understand that, but if we don't address the underlying issues, we're only putting a band-aid on a much larger problem. I want to ensure that no one else experiences what I did because of the color of their skin." The executives nodded, but Kevin could tell they were hesitant. They had a reputation to uphold, and admitting fault was not something that came easily in corporate environments. Yet he pressed on. "I want to suggest that we implement diversity and sensitivity training for all flight crew members. It's important that they understand the impact of their actions and assumptions," Kevin said. The panel looked at each other, murmurs of concern passing among them. "We'll take your suggestions into consideration," the CEO finally said, though his tone lacked conviction. After the meeting, Kevin felt a mix of emotions. He had spoken his truth, but he wasn't sure if it would lead to any real change. The executives had listened, but their body language suggested that they were more focused on protecting their image than on addressing the systemic issues within the airline. News of the meeting quickly spread, and Kevin found himself in the spotlight once again. Media outlets reported on his call for change, and social media buzzed with discussions about diversity in the aviation industry. Some people praised him for speaking up, while others criticized him for being confrontational. One evening, Kevin sat in his living room, scrolling through the comments. He saw praise like "finally, someone is speaking out," and harsh criticisms like "why make a scene? Just accept the recognition and move on." It was overwhelming, and he found himself questioning whether he had made the right decision by confronting the airline. Just then, his phone rang. It was Sarah, the flight attendant who had disrespected him on the plane. He hesitated before answering. What could she possibly want? "Kevin, I hope you're doing well," she said, her voice hesitant. "I wanted to reach out to apologize for how I treated you. I didn't know who you were, and I let my biases cloud my judgment." Kevin felt a mixture of relief and skepticism. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate your apology, but it's important to remember that this isn't just about you and me. It's about creating a better environment for everyone." "I know," she replied, sounding sincere. "I've been thinking about what you said. I want to help promote change. I think we all need to do better." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious? Because if you want to make a difference, you need to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations." "I am," Sarah insisted. "I'm willing to learn and help others understand. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to be part of the solution." Kevin considered her words. It was a surprising turn of events, and he wasn't sure if he could trust her sincerity. "Okay, let's talk more about this," he said cautiously. "Change takes time, and it won't happen overnight." Over the next few weeks, Kevin found himself at the center of a growing movement. With Sarah's newfound determination to help, they began organizing workshops and training sessions for flight attendants and pilots. They wanted to address biases and create a more inclusive environment within the airline. But not everyone was on board. Some flight crew members resisted the idea of mandatory training, arguing that it wasn't necessary. A few even accused Kevin and Sarah of trying to create unnecessary drama within the company. The backlash was swift, and tensions began to rise. One day, during a workshop, Kevin faced a particularly hostile group of flight attendants. They sat with their arms crossed, skepticism written all over their faces. Kevin felt the pressure building as he prepared to share his story. "Why should we listen to you?" one of the attendants sneered. "You're just trying to make us look bad." Kevin took a deep breath. "This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about understanding how our actions affect others. I was in a life or death situation, and it shouldn't matter what I look like or where I come from. Everyone deserves respect." The room remained silent, but he could see some faces beginning to soften. "You may not realize it, but your assumptions can have real consequences. We're here to learn, to grow, and to make sure that everyone feels safe on a flight." Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. One by one, a few attendants began to speak up, sharing their own experiences and insecurities. As they did, Kevin felt a sense of hope that change was possible. But not everyone was convinced. A group of flight attendants continued to oppose the training, arguing that it was unnecessary and divisive. They started a social media campaign against Kevin and Sarah, painting them as troublemakers trying to disrupt the airline. The backlash against Kevin and Sarah intensified, and soon, it was all over social media. The narrative shifted, with some outlets portraying them as overreaching and creating division within the airline. Kevin felt like he was fighting an uphill battle, and the stress was starting to take a toll on him. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Kevin received a message from a friend in the aviation industry. "Kevin, I just wanted to let you know that people are talking. Some are even saying you should be removed from the training program. This could affect your career." His heart sank. "What? Why?" "Because they see you as a threat. You're challenging the status quo, and not everyone is ready for that," his friend explained. "But I believe in what you're doing. You have to keep fighting." Determined not to back down, Kevin decided to hold a press conference. He wanted to speak directly to the public about the importance of diversity and the need for change in the aviation industry. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to stand up for what was right. On the day of the press conference, the atmosphere was electric. News crews gathered, and supporters filled the seats in front of the podium. Kevin felt the weight of the moment as he prepared to share his story once again. As he spoke about his experience on the flight, the need for change, and the importance of respect, he saw the crowd nodding in agreement. He was met with cheers and applause, but he also felt the tension from the opposing side. Of the protesters stepped forward, a fiery determination in her eyes. You think we'll listen to you just because you apologize? This isn't just about one bad flight or one bad attitude. It's about a culture that's broken. We've been disrespected, too. The crowd roared in agreement, their voices echoing in the venue. Kevin could feel the atmosphere shift again. Sarah, however, remained calm. I understand that. I know I've made mistakes. But this is our opportunity to change that culture. We can't do it by shouting at each other. As the tension between the groups mounted, Kevin sensed the urgency of the moment. He stepped forward again, feeling the heat of the situation rise. Let's try to find common ground. We all want respect. We all want safety on our flights. We can work together to make that happen. His voice was steady, but inside, he was racing with anxiety. He wasn't sure if he could convince them, but he had to try. The crowd started murmuring, and some looked contemplative. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to bridge the gap. But before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted at the back of the venue. A figure emerged, pushing through the crowd. Sarah's colleague, James, who had been against the training from the start. This is nonsense, he shouted, his voice booming. You're ruining our reputation. All for what? To satisfy a few complaints? Kevin felt a chill run down his spine. James was known for his strong opinions, and he was a respected voice among the crew. If he took the stage, it could undermine everything Kevin and Sarah had been trying to achieve. James, please, Sarah shouted, stepping toward him. We're not here to ruin anything. We're trying to improve it. But James was not deterred. You think we need more training? You think that's going to fix the problem? You're being naive. His voice was sharp, and the crowd began to split between supporters and dissenters. The atmosphere turned electric as the crowd became divided. Some began shouting in support of Kevin and Sarah, while others rallied behind James. It was a cacophony of voices, each claiming their own truths, each equally passionate. Kevin felt his heart race. This isn't helping. We're here to talk, to share, and to understand one another. Fighting won't get us anywhere. He tried to project calm, but the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface was palpable. Why should we listen to you, Kevin? You're just some guy who got lucky, James retorted. The crowd gasped, and Kevin felt his stomach drop. He had faced disrespect in the air, but this was something else entirely. Listen, I may not be a veteran like you, but I've got experience flying planes, and I've seen how biases can affect people, Kevin countered, trying to regain control of the conversation. This isn't just about me. It's about creating a safer environment for everyone, including you. Suddenly, a voice called from the back. Maybe you should prove yourself then. Show us you're more than just a passenger. It was another flight attendant, a friend of James, adding fuel to the fire. The crowd murmured, and Kevin realized he was facing an unexpected challenge. What do you want me to prove? He asked, his voice rising above the din. That I'm a pilot? That I'm worthy? What does that even mean in this situation? James stepped forward again. Let's make this interesting then. Why don't you take a flight with us, and show us how you can handle the controls? Put your money where your mouth is. Kevin hesitated, feeling the weight of the challenge. You want me to fly? In front of everyone? That's not how this works, he said, but deep down, he felt a stir of determination. What's the matter? Afraid you'll fail? James taunted, a smirk plastered across his face. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, drawn in by the spectacle. Kevin's heart raced. The challenge felt reckless, but a part of him knew this was the moment to show everyone his true capabilities, not just as a pilot, but as someone fighting against prejudice and division. Fine. Kevin said, surprising even himself. I'll take you up on that challenge. But if I do this, it needs to be about more than just proving a point. It needs to be about coming together. James laughed, but the tension in the air shifted as more people began to take notice. You think you can just waltz in and fly a plane? We'll see about that. As the murmurs in the crowd intensified, Kevin turned to Sarah, who looked equally shocked and concerned. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. I don't have a choice. If I back down now, it will only reinforce the stereotypes, he replied, his voice steady despite the nerves threatening to bubble over. But we need to use this opportunity to highlight the need for change. After a brief discussion, they agreed on a time for the flight. A small plane would be used, and they would invite the crew and media to observe. This was it. Kevin knew he had to show not only that he could fly but that he could foster understanding among everyone on board. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Kevin practiced flying, ensuring he was at the top of his game. Meanwhile, Sarah reached out to supporters and arranged for press coverage. The excitement and tension grew as the day approached. The day of the flight arrived, and Kevin stood outside the small aircraft, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. Media crews gathered, and flight attendants whispered among themselves. Sarah walked up to him, her expression serious. Remember, this isn't just about flying. It's about showing that we can all work together, she said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. As the group boarded the plane, Kevin noticed a mixture of support and skepticism in the eyes of the crew. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the importance of the moment. Once everyone was seated, Kevin took his position in the cockpit. The engines roared to life, and he felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. He glanced at Sarah, who was in the passenger seat, ready to support him. As the plane took off, Kevin focused on the controls, feeling the familiar thrill of flying wash over him. Okay, everyone, he said over the intercom, trying to inject confidence into his voice. Let's enjoy this flight and work together to show that we can overcome our differences. Just then, the plane jolted violently, and the lights flickered. Kevin's heart dropped as he fought to regain control. Hold on, we're experiencing turbulence, he shouted, focusing on the instruments. The panic in the cabin was palpable as the passengers and crew exchanged nervous glances. Kevin gripped the controls tightly, his training kicking in. Just as he stabilized the plane, another warning light blinked ominously. Kevin, what's happening? Sarah asked, her voice tense. I'm not sure yet, he replied, scanning the instruments. But we have to stay calm. Everyone needs to trust me. The turbulence intensified, and the plane shook violently. He could hear the passengers crying out, fear spreading like wildfire. Suddenly, another warning flashed, engine failure. Kevin's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. He had to act quickly. He turned to Sarah. We need to inform everyone that I'm going to attempt an emergency landing. It's going to be rough, but we'll get through this. With the crew and passengers watching him, Kevin knew this was the moment to prove his worth, not just to them, but to himself. The tension in the cabin was thick, and all eyes were on him. As he prepared for the landing, Kevin's mind raced through the training he had received. He took a deep breath, focusing on the controls and the situation at hand. Here we go, he muttered to himself, steeling his resolve. As Kevin expertly navigated the aircraft through the turbulence, he felt a surge of determination. This was his chance to show everyone, not just that he was a pilot, but that he was someone who could face adversity head-on. He could hear the crew whispering among themselves, some beginning to believe in him. But just as he was about to make his final approach, another alert blared, louder and more urgent than before. Warning, fuel levels critically low. The cabin erupted into chaos, passengers screaming as fear took hold. Kevin's heart raced as he realized the severity of the situation. He had to act now. Everyone, brace for landing, he shouted, his voice breaking through the panic. In that moment, he knew that failure was not an option. He had to land this plane safely, not just for himself but for everyone aboard. The stakes had never been higher, and as he focused on the runway ahead, he felt the weight of their lives resting in his hands. With the cabin in turmoil and the clock ticking, Kevin gripped the controls tighter than ever, preparing for the landing that would define him, one way or another. What would happen next? Would Kevin be able to land the plane safely, or would this flight end in tragedy? As he steadied himself for the challenge ahead, the future remained uncertain, leaving everyone on edge, their fates intertwined in this high-stakes moment. Kevin's heart thundered in his chest as he maneuvered the aircraft through the turbulent skies. The alert about the critically low fuel levels echoed in his mind, heightening his sense of urgency. He glanced at the frightened faces of the passengers, seeing their fear mirrored in the eyes of the crew. "Stay calm," he shouted, trying to project confidence. "I need everyone to focus on my voice. We're going to land safely." He turned to Sarah, who was visibly shaken but trying to maintain composure. "Keep them calm. Tell them what to expect," he instructed, hoping his words would ease the tension. As Sarah moved through the cabin, reassuring the passengers, Kevin focused on the runway ahead. He needed to make the landing as smooth as possible, but the turbulence made it difficult to maintain control. Every bump sent waves of panic through the cabin, and he could hear whispers of doubt and fear. Come on, he murmured to himself, gripping the controls tightly. He could do this. He had trained for emergencies. He had to trust in his abilities. He glanced at the fuel gauge again. It was dangerously low. "Okay, Kevin, just like we practiced," he whispered under his breath. He set his sights on the runway, adjusting his altitude as he approached. The wind whipped around the aircraft, but he kept steady, trying to ignore the tension creeping up his spine. "Brace for impact," Kevin shouted as they neared the runway. He felt the adrenaline coursing through him, sharp and electrifying. He could hear the passengers holding their breath, the silence in the cabin deafening. The wheels of the aircraft touched down hard, and Kevin quickly engaged the brakes. The plane skidded slightly but steadied as he fought to maintain control. The roar of the engines filled the air, drowning out the chaotic sounds of the cabin. He could feel the relief wash over him as they slowed down, finally coming to a stop just before the end of the runway. The cabin erupted in cheers and gasps, a mix of relief and disbelief. "Everyone, stay seated," Kevin called out, his voice rising above the noise. He turned to Sarah, who was looking at him with wide eyes, a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "We did it," he said, still trying to process what had just happened. But as the passengers began to unbuckle their seatbelts, Kevin knew the moment wasn't over. They needed to evacuate the aircraft quickly. He grabbed the intercom again, his heart still racing. "Please remain calm and exit the aircraft in an orderly fashion. We'll ensure everyone gets out safely." Once everyone had evacuated, Kevin stepped out of the cockpit, taking a deep breath of the fresh air outside. The crew and passengers gathered at a safe distance, still processing the harrowing experience. As he joined them, he was met with a mixture of applause and murmurs of disbelief. "You really pulled it off," one of the flight attendants exclaimed, her eyes shining with admiration. "I can't believe we made it." But just as Kevin began to feel a sense of pride, the reality of what had just happened hit him. He turned to Sarah, who looked both relieved and concerned. "What's next?" she asked, her voice low. "We need to check on everyone, make sure they're okay," he replied, glancing around at the crowd. The media was already arriving, cameras flashing as they captured the aftermath of the emergency landing. As they approached the passengers, Kevin felt a rush of gratitude for their safety. "Thank you all for your bravery and patience," he said, his voice steady. "I know this was scary, but you handled it wonderfully. We're here to help." The crowd began to settle down as the reality of the situation sank in. But as they spoke with the passengers, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of their story. Later that day, a press conference was organized to address the incident. Kevin stood next to Sarah, facing a sea of reporters, cameras flashing. He felt the weight of their scrutiny and the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. "Can you explain what happened during the flight?" a reporter shouted from the back, her voice cutting through the chatter. Kevin took a deep breath. "We encountered unexpected turbulence, and there was a critical alert regarding our fuel levels. I had to make quick decisions to ensure the safety of everyone on board." "What do you say to those who doubt your ability as a pilot?" another reporter asked, and Kevin felt the familiar pang of uncertainty rise in him. "I understand the doubts, but I believe that experience and communication are key. This incident taught us all a lot about teamwork and the importance of addressing biases within our industry," he replied, meeting the gaze of the reporters with newfound confidence. Sarah added, "We're committed to ensuring that this doesn't happen again. We're working to create a more inclusive environment that prioritizes respect and safety for everyone involved." The reporters continued to fire questions, but Kevin felt a sense of resolve building within him. This was about more than just him or the flight. It was about creating lasting change. As the press conference wrapped up, Kevin and Sarah stepped aside, both feeling the weight of the day's events. "You did great out there," Sarah said, a smile breaking through her earlier seriousness. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without your support," he replied, feeling the bond between them strengthen. "But we still have a lot of work ahead of us." Sarah nodded. "We need to take this moment and use it as a catalyst for change. We have to keep pushing for better training and understanding among the crew. This can't just be a one-time thing." Kevin agreed. "I want to make sure that what happened today leads to real improvements. It's time to challenge the status quo." As they walked away from the cameras, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city. Kevin felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had faced his fears, proven himself as a pilot, and brought a group of people together in a moment of crisis. In the weeks that followed, the airline began implementing new training programs based on the lessons learned from the incident. Kevin and Sarah were at the forefront of these changes, actively participating in workshops and discussions about inclusivity and respect. The media coverage of the emergency landing had sparked a national conversation about the need for change in the aviation industry. Kevin received messages of support from fellow pilots and crew members across the country, praising his bravery and the steps he was taking to improve the industry. One evening, while reviewing feedback from a training session, Kevin received a message from one of the flight attendants. "I just wanted to say thank you for being a role model. You showed us that it's okay to speak up and demand better." His heart swelled with pride. "This is just the beginning," he typed back. "Together, we can create a safer and more respectful environment for everyone." As the months passed, the airline began to transform, prioritizing safety and inclusivity. Kevin felt a sense of purpose growing within him, driven by the belief that they were making a difference. One day, as Kevin was leaving a meeting about the new training protocols, he spotted a familiar face in the hallway. It was James, the flight attendant who had initially challenged him during the protest. "Hey," James said, a sheepish look on his face. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior back then. You really showed us what a true pilot is." Kevin was taken aback but grateful for the acknowledgement. "Thank you, James. It means a lot to hear that. I think we all learned something valuable that day." James nodded. "We need more leaders like you. I'd like to work with you on future training sessions if you're open to it." "Absolutely," Kevin replied, feeling a sense of camaraderie. "Together, we can make a real impact." As the airline continued to evolve, Kevin found himself taking on more responsibilities, including mentoring new pilots and contributing to policy changes. The challenges he faced in the air had prepared him for this new role, and he embraced it with enthusiasm. One day, while reviewing applications for new pilots, Kevin noticed a name that stood out to him: Linda, a young woman from a diverse background who had faced significant obstacles in her pursuit of becoming a pilot. "Sarah, can you come take a look at this application?" he called out, intrigued. "I think we might have a candidate who could bring a unique perspective to our team." As they reviewed Linda's application, Kevin felt a sense of excitement. This was an opportunity to help someone else navigate the path he had walked, ensuring that their journey was smoother than his own. When Linda joined the team, Kevin took her under his wing, guiding her through the intricacies of flight training and sharing his experiences. He was determined to support her as she pursued her dream, just as he had once fought for his own. "Remember, it's not just about flying," he told her during a training session. "It's about fostering a culture of respect and teamwork in the cockpit. You have the potential to inspire others." Linda smiled, inspired by Kevin's mentorship. "Thank you for believing in me. I want to make a difference, too." As their training progressed, Kevin found himself reflecting on how far he had come since that fateful flight. He realized that his journey was no longer just about proving himself. It was about paving the way for others, creating a legacy of inclusivity and respect in the aviation industry. Months passed, and the changes within the airline began to show tangible results. Crew members felt empowered to voice their concerns, and the culture shifted towards one of collaboration and support. Kevin's leadership had sparked a movement, and he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. One day, as Kevin sat in his office reviewing training materials, he received an email from the airline's executive team. They wanted to recognize his contributions and the significant progress made since the emergency landing incident. They proposed a special event to celebrate the changes and highlight the importance of diversity in aviation. "Wow, this is huge," Kevin said to Sarah, who was seated across from him. "They want to spotlight our efforts." Sarah grinned. "You deserve it. You've worked tirelessly to make a difference. This is a great opportunity to inspire even more people." Kevin nodded, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through him. He would have to speak publicly about the journey, but he knew that this was another chance to advocate for the values he believed in. The day of the celebration arrived, and the airline's headquarters buzzed with energy. Employees gathered, dressed in their best, ready to acknowledge the positive changes taking place. Kevin stood backstage, feeling the weight of the moment. "Just be yourself," Sarah encouraged, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Remember, you're here to share our story and inspire others." When Kevin took the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. He glanced at the familiar faces of his colleagues, the flight attendants, and especially Linda, who was beaming with pride in the front row. "Thank you all for being here today," Kevin began, his voice steady. "What started as a terrifying experience has turned into something beautiful. We faced challenges, but together we created a culture of safety and respect. This is just the beginning." As he spoke, he shared the lessons learned from the incident and the importance of inclusivity in aviation. He encouraged others to speak up, to share their experiences, and to continue pushing for change. The crowd listened intently, nodding along, and he could see the spark of inspiration in their eyes. After the event, Kevin felt a renewed sense of purpose. The recognition from the airline was a significant milestone, but he knew that their work was far from over. He and Sarah began to brainstorm ideas for a mentorship program aimed at helping aspiring pilots from diverse backgrounds. "We can create a scholarship fund, too," Sarah suggested one afternoon as they discussed their plans over coffee. "We can help those who might not have the resources to pursue their dreams." "I love that idea," Kevin replied, excitement bubbling up inside him. "We can partner with local schools and organizations to reach out to students and show them that flying is within their reach." As they continued to flesh out their ideas, Kevin felt the weight of responsibility lift. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about building a community and fostering a new generation of pilots who would carry the torch forward. Months later, the scholarship program was officially launched. Kevin stood at a podium once again, this time in front of a group of high school students eager to learn about aviation. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his enthusiasm infectious. "Today marks a new chapter not only for you but for the aviation industry as a whole. You have the potential to change the narrative and inspire future generations." He introduced the scholarship recipients, including Linda, who beamed with pride. "Each of you has shown incredible promise, and we believe in your dreams. This program will support you as you navigate your journey to becoming pilots." The students cheered, their excitement palpable. Kevin felt a rush of fulfillment knowing he was helping to open doors for others, just as he had hoped. As the scholarship program gained momentum, Kevin found himself reflecting on his journey. The fear he once felt about being overlooked had transformed into a deep commitment to uplift others. His friendship with Sarah grew stronger as they tackled challenges together, and they became a formidable team in the push for change. One evening, they sat together at a local cafe, discussing the impact of the scholarship program. "I can't believe how far we've come," Sarah said, her eyes shining with pride. "You've become a leader in this industry." "I couldn't have done it without you," Kevin replied, his gratitude sincere. "You challenged me to be better and to fight for what's right." But just as things seemed to be falling into place, unexpected challenges arose. A wave of incidents related to discrimination and bias in other airlines made headlines, sparking outrage and calls for accountability across the industry. Kevin knew that they had to take action. "We can't ignore this," he told Sarah as they watched the news. "We need to stand in solidarity and advocate for change, not just within our airline but across the entire aviation sector." Together, they organized a rally to bring attention to the issues plaguing the industry. Kevin was nervous but knew that his voice needed to be heard. The event attracted attention from pilots, crew members, and advocates who shared a common goal of promoting equality in aviation. On the day of the rally, Kevin stood before a crowd of passionate individuals, his heart racing. He could feel the energy in the air, a mix of determination and hope. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice strong. "Today, we stand together to demand change, to advocate for a safe and inclusive environment for everyone in aviation." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Kevin felt a surge of confidence. He shared his story, the struggles he had faced, and the progress they had made as a team. He called for solidarity and urged others to join in the fight against discrimination. As he spoke, he could see the unity among the crowd, a shared vision for a better future. It was a pivotal moment, and Kevin knew they were on the brink of something significant. Following the rally, media coverage increased, shining a light on the issues they were advocating for. Kevin received messages of support from industry leaders and other pilots, encouraging him to continue pushing for change. "We're making waves," Sarah said one evening as they reviewed the press coverage. "The attention we're getting is crucial. People are starting to listen. I just hope we can turn this momentum into real change," Kevin replied, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "We need to ensure that our message resonates and leads to actionable steps." Weeks later, Kevin and Sarah were invited to meet with industry executives to discuss the ongoing issues. As they walked into the boardroom, Kevin felt a mix of nerves and excitement. This was a chance to advocate for the changes they had fought so hard for. During the meeting, Kevin presented the findings from their rally, emphasizing the need for diversity training, inclusive hiring practices, and the establishment of a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. The executives listened intently, and as the discussion progressed, Kevin felt hope rising within him. They were receptive, asking questions and engaging in meaningful dialogue. "We need your leadership in this," one executive said. "You've shown that change is possible, and we want to work with you to implement these initiatives." In the months that followed, the airline began rolling out new diversity and inclusion initiatives. Kevin and Sarah were at the forefront of these efforts, collaborating with various departments to ensure the changes were effective. "It's amazing to see how much we've accomplished," Sarah said one day as they reviewed the new training materials. "I can't believe we're actually making a difference." Kevin smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "This is just the beginning. We need to keep pushing for more changes, ensuring this becomes a norm in our industry." As the years went by, the impact of their work became evident. The aviation industry began to shift toward greater inclusivity, and Kevin was proud to have played a part in that transformation. He mentored aspiring pilots, sharing his story and encouraging them to break barriers. On the anniversary of the emergency landing, Kevin and Sarah organized a celebration to honor the progress made. They invited everyone who had been involved in the journey, the passengers, the crew, and the supporters who stood by them. As Kevin took the stage once more, he felt a sense of fulfillment. "Today, we celebrate not just the changes within our airline but the power of community, resilience, and the importance of advocating for one another. Together, we've built a legacy of change, and I can't wait to see what the future holds." The crowd erupted in applause, and Kevin looked out at the faces of those who had joined him on this journey. He knew that their story was far from over, and he was excited about the possibilities ahead. As he stepped down from the stage, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. With every step, he was reminded that they had turned a moment of crisis into a catalyst for change, and that was something worth celebrating. In the years that followed, Kevin became a sought-after speaker at aviation conferences, sharing his story and advocating for diversity and inclusion. He remained committed to mentoring young pilots, ensuring that they had the support and resources needed to succeed. As he looked up at the sky one day, watching a plane take off, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. With every flight, he was reminded of the power of resilience and the importance of lifting others as they climbed. The sky was no longer just a place for flying, it was a canvas of possibilities, dreams, and the collective efforts of everyone who believed in a brighter, more inclusive future. However, challenges were inevitable. Despite the progress made, the aviation industry still faced hurdles. Reports of isolated incidents of discrimination resurfaced, and it became clear that the journey toward true equality was ongoing. Kevin understood that complacency could undermine their efforts. He and Sarah organized workshops and training sessions, aimed at reinforcing the message of inclusivity among employees. They reached out to other airlines, advocating for the sharing of best practices and collaboration on diversity initiatives. One setback doesn't erase the progress we've made, Kevin said during a team meeting, rallying his colleagues. Every step forward is a victory, and we must continue to fight for what's right. One day, while reviewing reports from the diversity committee, Kevin noticed a troubling trend. Employees were still hesitant to report incidents of discrimination. He realized they needed a platform where voices could be heard without fear of retaliation. We need to establish an anonymous reporting system, he suggested to Sarah. It'll allow employees to share their experiences and provide us with data to address the issues directly. Sarah nodded. That's a great idea. It'll help us understand the scope of the problem and respond effectively. They presented the proposal to the airline's leadership, who supported the initiative. Soon, an anonymous reporting system was implemented, providing a safe space for employees to share their experiences and concerns. With the new system in place, Kevin noticed a shift in the atmosphere among the staff. Employees began to open up, sharing their stories of discrimination and bias that had previously gone unreported. The feedback was invaluable, shedding light on areas that needed immediate attention. During a staff meeting, Kevin shared the importance of these revelations. It's crucial that we listen to each other and learn from these experiences. By sharing our stories, we build trust and create a culture where everyone feels valued. As discussions flourished, employees expressed gratitude for the opportunity to voice their concerns. Many felt empowered, realizing that they were not alone in their struggles. The success of the anonymous reporting system inspired Kevin and Sarah to organize an annual diversity conference. They invited industry leaders, advocates, and employees to discuss the importance of inclusivity in aviation and share best practices. As they prepared for the event, Kevin felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This is a big step, Sarah. We're bringing everyone together to have difficult conversations, he said. It's necessary, Sarah reassured him. We need to create a space where these topics can be discussed openly. Change starts with dialogue. The day of the conference arrived, and the venue buzzed with energy. Attendees mingled, sharing ideas and insights, and Kevin felt a surge of hope as he watched people from different backgrounds come together with a common goal. As the keynote speaker took the stage, Kevin listened intently. The speaker shared their own experiences in the industry and the importance of advocating for change. The audience was captivated, and Kevin felt inspired by the stories being shared. During the Q&A session, a young pilot stood up. What advice do you have for us, as future leaders in aviation, to continue advocating for diversity and inclusion? The speaker smiled. Listen to your colleagues, support each other, and don't be afraid to speak up. Every voice matters, and together, you can create a culture that embraces diversity. Kevin nodded, recognizing the power of those words. They echoed the journey he had been on and the responsibility that lay ahead. After the conference, Kevin and Sarah received positive feedback from attendees. Many expressed gratitude for the opportunity to engage in meaningful discussions. They felt invigorated, eager to continue the work that lay ahead. In the following months, Kevin expanded the mentorship program, partnering with local high schools to encourage students to pursue careers in aviation. He organized workshops to introduce them to the world of flying, igniting their passion for the skies. Look at how many young people are inspired, Sarah said one afternoon as they watched students interact with pilots. This is what it's all about. One evening, as Kevin sat on his porch, he reflected on the journey he had taken. From the terrifying moments of the emergency landing to becoming a leader in the fight for diversity and inclusion, it had been a transformative experience. He thought of Linda, who had blossomed into a confident and skilled pilot. She was now mentoring others, carrying forward the legacy of empowerment and support that he had envisioned. Change is a continuous journey, he mused, feeling grateful for the path that had led him here. We can't stop now. There's so much more to do. Despite the positive changes, not everyone welcomed the push for inclusivity. Some employees resisted the new initiatives, viewing them as unnecessary or burdensome. Kevin and Sarah knew they had to address this resistance head-on. We need to show them that inclusivity benefits everyone, not just certain groups, Kevin said during a team meeting. It leads to a more harmonious workplace and ultimately improves our service. They organized discussions with those who were skeptical, encouraging open dialogue about the importance of diversity in the workplace. Slowly but surely, perspectives began to shift. Recognizing the need for broader support, Kevin reached out to organizations dedicated to promoting diversity in aviation. They forged partnerships to enhance their programs, bringing in experts who could provide valuable insights. One afternoon, as they hosted a workshop, Kevin was inspired by the passion of the speakers. We can learn so much from each other, he said during a break. Together, we can create a ripple effect that reaches beyond our airline. As the year came to a close, Kevin and Sarah decided to hold a celebration to honor the progress made. They invited employees and community members to recognize the collective efforts toward creating a more inclusive environment. The event was a success, filled with laughter, music, and storytelling. Kevin took the stage once more, reflecting on the journey. Today, we celebrate not just our achievements but the commitment we've made to each other, he said, his voice filled with emotion. Together, we've built a community that believes in the power of diversity and the importance of lifting each other up. The crowd erupted in applause, and as Kevin looked around, he felt a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. The journey was ongoing, but they were stronger together. As they entered a new year, Kevin and Sarah set their sights on expanding their initiatives further. They envisioned programs that would reach even more aspiring pilots and create pathways for underrepresented groups in aviation. We can't just celebrate our progress. We need to keep pushing boundaries, Kevin said, his determination unwavering. Let's inspire the next generation to dream bigger and fly higher. Over the following years, the scholarship program flourished. Many students pursued careers in aviation, and Kevin felt a deep sense of fulfillment watching them achieve their dreams. He often reflected on how far he had come from that fateful day in the cockpit. One afternoon, as he mentored a new group of scholarship recipients, he saw the spark in their eyes. They were filled with ambition and excitement, ready to take on the skies. Remember, he said to them, every flight is a journey. Embrace the challenges, learn from your experiences, and always lift each other up. Just as things were progressing smoothly, a significant challenge arose. The airline faced scrutiny from regulators regarding its diversity initiatives. Critics claimed that they were merely superficial efforts without real impact. Kevin and Sarah knew they had to demonstrate the genuine progress they had made. They compiled data, success stories, and testimonials to showcase the positive changes within the company. Let's turn this challenge into an opportunity, Sarah said as they prepared their presentation for the regulatory board. We can show them the real impact of our initiatives. The day of the presentation arrived, and Kevin felt a mix of nerves and excitement as he stepped before the regulatory board. Thank you for this opportunity, he began, his heart racing. Today, I want to share our journey toward creating a more inclusive environment in our airline. He spoke passionately about the scholarship program, the mentorship initiatives, and the positive feedback from employees. He highlighted the anonymous reporting system and the cultural shift that had occurred. This isn't just about meeting standards, it's about transforming lives and building a community, he concluded, his voice unwavering. We are committed to this journey and will continue to advocate for change. After the presentation, the board commended Kevin and Sarah for their efforts. They recognized the authenticity of their initiatives and expressed support for continuing to strengthen the airline's diversity efforts. Your commitment to inclusivity is commendable, one board member remarked. We look forward to seeing how you build upon this foundation. As Kevin and Sarah left the meeting, they exchanged triumphant smiles. We did it, Kevin said, feeling a surge of relief and pride. This is a turning point for us. With renewed energy, Kevin and Sarah ramped up their outreach efforts, sharing their story with other airlines and industry leaders. They participated in conferences and panels, advocating for the importance of diversity in aviation.